Hey, what's going on, guys? Mastar here, and I found something really interesting here today that I want to go over with you guys, especially for all of you who are interested in animation, maybe having your own story come to life, commissioning a studio to do your story. This is really cool and gives some great insight as to the cost of animations throughout history, particularly movies and some famous TV shows that you know. So this is an amigraph made by Powehouse Animation, which is the company that did the Castlevania anime for Netflix. If you haven't seen the Castlevania anime, I highly suggest you go check it out. It is very cool, very well done. This is an American studio, so it was really nice to see an American studio do some anime level quality. I know they did outsource a lot of the work overseas to Japanese companies. I believe it was Madhouse. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you guys is, let's talk about episodes before we get into movies. For one thing I noticed that was interesting, one South Park episode cost $250,000. Now, the average cost in Japan for an episode of anime can cost between $180,000 and $300,000. That is usually the norm, but over in the US, the animators are paid a lot more. They're paid respectable US salaries. Even at Disney animators can make over six figures, so they can make like $120,000 a year for their senior level animators. So obviously that's going to be way more than over in Japan, where they're getting paid $1,000 a month. So South Park, $250,000 is relatively low. But if we look at Afro Samurai, which has a very anime feel, and I got to talk to my friend, the producer for Afro Samurai, I believe that they also had a lot of Japanese influence on this as well. But $1 million an episode, guys. $1 million an episode for Afro Samurai. I mean, that's freaking crazy. For Afro Samurai, there was 5 episodes. So each episode, 22 minutes, $1 million. That's per frame, $50 a frame, which actually, when you think about it, isn't that outside of the norm. In Japan, they can, the Japanese masters, they usually charge like $40 a frame, or so I've heard. But when you talk about per second, per minute, $53,000 per minute. So there's 5 episodes. I mean, just imagine that, guys. It's $5 million for 5 episodes of anime. So this is one of the biggest challenges for me trying to create Demon Rush, something that is this high of quality, is that we have maybe $40,000 or something. It's obviously not going to look the caliber that a lot of these professionally made anime are, and I'm hoping that people will give it a chance. But let's talk about some of the other major features here. Simpsons episode costs $1 million per episode. And even though it's not anime, you'll notice something about Simpsons is that it's extremely fluid, and that's a lot of frames. They have a lot of artists and animators that work on The Simpsons. Now, Treasure Planet, I believe, is the most expensive 2D animated film in history at $140 million, but that is not the most expensive animated film in history, just 2D. When we go over to 3D and you look at Tangled, $260 million for that movie, Toy Story 3 and Cars 2 and Monster University and Finding Dory, all $200 million to make. However, this list, which is the most expensive animated films, are all 3D films. So whenever people tell you that 3D is less expensive than 2D, that's not traditionally true. The thing with 3D is that the upfront costs are way more expensive when you're building all the characters and the worlds. It's way more expensive. Yes, once you have those rigs, it's a lot easier to animate, but building all those rigs, it's insanely time consuming and requires a lot of professionals. Let's go back before we go to some of the more recent ones. Let's go to some of the early animated films that you guys may be familiar with. And the cool thing is that they've adjusted this for inflation. So you can kind of see Pinocchio. If you adjusted it for inflation today, it would cost about $39 million. Fantasia, if you adjust it for inflation, $38.5 million. Back then, it was about $2 million, and that was in the 1940s. Okay, let's get into some of the more popular movies that I grew up with that maybe you guys in your late 20s and 30s will know. The most popular 2D movies of my generation, Aladdin in 1992, cost $28 million. Adjusting for inflation, it would be $47 million. Per frame, guys, almost $500 per frame. So can you imagine that? Every drawing costs $500, at least the keyframes. Will probably be something like that. Could you imagine if you wanted to create your own show and you went to a studio and you're like, okay, well, how much is it going to cost for me to make this movie? And they said $500,000 per minute. I mean, your jaw would slam on the ground. And the reason it's so expensive is it's all in the labor for the most part. I mean, most of these studios, they have all the technology already built, but it's about paying people over, a year, 2 years of work. They have to sit there and work, and you got to pay them hourly or, yearly salaries. And it adds up when you have so many people working on that team. Another one of my favorite movies from back in my day, The Lion King, back then cost $80 million. If you adjusted that for inflation today, it would cost almost $127 million, guys. Almost $1.5 million per minute of animation. The thing is, guys, it's not only just drawing. The drawing is just such a small piece of the overall production. You have all of the people who do the coloring, the compositing, the effects, the landscape artists, the music composers, the VFX, SFX. There is so many people that go into creating an animated film that when you combine all of their hourly wages, that's what comes out to something like $1,300 per second. But hey, it paid off. The Lion King was one of the most incredible animated films, arguably the most incredible in history, and that's why it is so expensive. You need experts in the industry to be working on this thing for over a year. And yeah, it's going to be really, really expensive. Almost as much, if not more, if not a lot more, than most actual non-animated films. It says here that the Family Guy pilot in 1996 cost them $50,000 to make. That is very, very cheap, at least in comparison to everything else. Tarzan in 1999 cost $130 million. Adjusted for inflation would be $184,000. I mean, just mind-bogglingly expensive, but these movies, they do that. The reason why they focus on kids for a lot of these high budget animated films is because they know that once all the kids come and see the movie, they're going to buy it and watch it at home too. They get a lot of merchandise and like DVD and Blu-ray sales from these animated movies. So they do compensate for it, but Treasure Planet, which we talked about earlier, adjusted for inflation, now would be $184 million. This flopped big time. This was a production by Disney, and it was a huge movie for them that just completely tanked. And man, that must have really hurt Disney because they lost like, I don't know, $100 million or something close to that on this movie. South Park movie cost $21 million. Now, the thing about South Park is I've heard that they can produce their episodes like insanely fast. I hope that they can because the art is pretty low. I mean, it's more comedy and voiceover than the actual visuals, but that's still a lot of money for a movie that has the most basic of possible visuals and animations in there. I mean, that's as low as it's going to go, is $21 million for a movie. And then finally, as an example, an episode of SpongeBob costs $500,000 to make. So even those very childish looking animations that you see on Toonami and things like that, they're still insanely expensive. I mean, an episode of SpongeBob costs $500,000 to make, guys. Just imagine that. And this is one thing that people don't understand, how difficult it is to create animation, how expensive it is. It's not a one-man job. And that's why when you see animators on YouTube who are creating even 2 minutes by themselves, I mean, they need a round of applause. They need all the support that they can get. It is a monumental feat to be able to create long animations with even just a small team. An animated movie can have upwards of 600 artists working on it, all with different roles, working on different pieces or overarching layers of that animated movie. So when you see like 1 to 4 animators putting out something for free for you on YouTube, you should have the most respect for them in the world. And that's that's kind of what I wanted to accomplish 2 things with this video. I wanted you guys to have more respect for the animators on YouTube that are giving you all of this content for free. And I also wanted to teach you guys who want your own animated movies or concepts brought to life. I mean, I get an email every single day from someone that says, hey, I have an idea for a really awesome story. Could you animate it? And this is why we can't, guys. It's crazy expensive. And we're not going to put that amount of money and hours into something unless it's our own idea. And all of the professional animators that I know, at least, the ones on YouTube, they're all very busy with their own projects. The reason why we do this, the reason why we invest so much time in making these videos for you guys for free is because we're so passionate about it. But in terms of actually like making a career off YouTube animation, I mean, you're talking about like if you're making an episode that you're putting on YouTube for free, you could have made that episode for a company for like $500,000, right? But you're giving it out to the world for free. And I hope that registers with you guys. One of the most horrible things about being an animator on YouTube is that animation is tragically misunderstood and highly criticized. It is one of the most difficult things to perform on the internet, and it is one of the most highly criticized things on the internet. And it's completely flip-flopped. It shouldn't be like this. People should have more respect for animation. They should have more acknowledgement of how expensive it is, how time-consuming it is. They should have more education. And I think part of the problem here, why animation is criticized so much, is because people are just simply uneducated as to how hard it is and how much work goes into it. And that's part of what I do here on YouTube, is try to educate people. And because honestly, and it's okay. I mean, maybe it's not okay, but I didn't know either. Like growing up, I always wanted to be an animator, and I had no idea what went into it until I started doing it myself, and I was just completely blown away. And I think that the biggest issue here, the reason why animation gets criticized more than anything else, is ignorance. It's just simply that people think that it creates itself, and they don't realize that any little movement, any little blink, any little particle of dust that's on the screen has to be hand-drawn and hand-moved 12 times a second. And that's just absolutely astounding when you think about it, guys. And that's why it's so expensive, is paying for the labor for all these people to produce every second of animation. I mean, look at that, guys. Per minute of animation, per second of animation for SpongeBob, $445. And if you want your story to come alive one day, not to discourage you, but you either better have some deep pockets, or you better have the patience to be able to sit down and teach yourself and learn so that you can do it yourself. I hope you guys learned something from this video. If you want to look at the rest of these and get some more knowledge, and check out the Powerhouse Animation website. They didn't sponsor this or anything, but I'll put a link in the description. They actually have some really good tutorials and other things on this website where you can teach you certain things about animation, about in-betweens, about using simple shapes to create characters. It's actually a really helpful website, and they're a great studio and someone that I look up to. So go check out the link in the description, and thanks for stopping by, and hope you guys learned something. All right, peace.